When will Konami up the extra to 20 cards? I don't feel like that's something they should do. I think the extra deck being limited to 15 cards is a good limitation to play around. I think certain decks having trouble with extra deck space is fine. I think one thing they could do, hear me out, I just had a genius idea. Before we move on with the video, let me have a quick word to you from one of the channel's sponsors, which is Sleeve Chief. Sleeve Chief have a massive Black Friday sale coming up, which is not going to be only lasting for one day. It's going to be an entire week where you guys are going to be able to get 20% off. Plus, you're going to be able to use Josh5 for 5% off on top of that. They're going to be restocking a lot of their products, the Pod Dynasty collection, new border sleeves, the Death collection, all that kind of stuff. Stay tuned for that. It starts 24th of November and it lasts for an entire week. Once again, 20% off plus Josh5 for 5% off. Link is going to be in the description below. Without further ado, let's move on with the video. I think just increasing the extra deck for every single deck out there, I think it would be a mistake because certain decks would just benefit way too much from the extra utility, from the extra deck space, right? But I think there are certain decks out there where it would be nice if they could play more. Because, for example, just the first thing I was thinking of, no bias at all, Salamangreat is a deck where the entire gimmick of the deck is that you have to play every single monster multiple times because the idea is that you link them into each other, right? Something that I thought of right now, which I think would actually not be like terrible, is if they made cards where they would print on the card. Let's say they make a link monster and they print on it. This card does not count towards your 15 card extra deck limit or whatever. You know what I mean? But it's like a Salamangreat link monster that is only good in Salamangreat anyway, so it doesn't matter for any other deck, right? That is something you could do, theoretically, right? But then everyone with Pot of Prosperity in their deck would just play 3 of that as well, right? It has some implications for balancing as well, right? This seems an impossible ruling. Why? What's the issue? Like, it's like when your opponent asks for your extra deck size and you say 18, then they know that that card's in there, right? Like, it wouldn't be a big problem. It would just make specifically Prosperity and Extravagance way better. That is true. Yeah. It's not something that I've thought about forever and have forged a balanced concept in my mind. I was just thinking, basically, you can make an argument that some decks deserve more extra deck space, right? Like, I would say something like Salamangreat is already not a great deck, right? And it also struggles with extra deck space on top of already being a weaker main deck than other decks, right? But you cannot just lift the extra deck space for every deck because then other decks would also benefit from that, but you don't want that, right? Maybe you think of a solution for Salad of like that nature, right? And then I thought like the only way you would do that without lifting the requirement for everybody is you would have to make cards that specifically state that, right? How about it doesn't count if you have 10 Salamangrates in the extra deck? You know what I just noticed is that the problem it would be, let's just say they make a link monster that says it doesn't count towards the extra deck count of 15, right? The problem with that would be that every single deck would play it, right? There's literally no reason not to play that card. Like, if your deck plays Prosperity, it's literally 3 free banishes for Prosperity. If your deck plays Extravagance, it makes it so that you are way less likely to banish your important stuff, right? Literally everybody would play it, right? Which is probably not ideal in terms of card design. That's probably not ideal. You would have to find a way to make it so only Salamangreat can play it. So you would have to put some other restriction on it. Like maybe if you only have fire monsters in your extra deck, it doesn't count towards your extra deck limit or whatever. Or something like if you only have fire monsters in your extra deck limit is now 20 or something like that. They could make cards like this for specifically certain decks, right? This card can only leave the extra deck by being summoned, for example. That could also technically work. But then, even then, you would still play it in every deck, just to make your opponent think you're playing Salamangreat, literally. Even if you had it just so, like, it couldn't leave the extra deck, just to bamboozle your opponent that you have 18 extra deck cards, you would still play it. Basically, what I'm trying to get to is exactly what someone in chat just said. If you're playing this shitty archetype or this not as good archetype right now, you get to play more extra deck. That I would be fine with. I don't know exactly what the way would be. That I would be fine with. If they basically lifted the extra deck restriction a little bit for certain decks that really need it. The prime example that we're using for some reason is just Salamangreat now. There are other ways how they could make Salamangreat viable. My problem is that they have designed Salamangreat in a way that you cannot possibly play as they intended it to be played because they just gave it way too many extra deck cards, right? It's way more than you can even fit into a 15 card extra deck. It's not possible to play Salamangreat as intended, which is kind of awkward. Even with just the Link monsters, you would have more than 15, but they also made, you know, they have Xyz, they have fusions, they have synchros. It's like, it's just not possible to play a deck like this, right? I think it would be an interesting approach to a deck because we've seen so much like legacy support, so many ways to make a deck better, right? But we've never had them mess with certain decks being able to adjust. And this, for example, this is something that has been done in other card games as well. Like, I'm just thinking of Hearthstone, where they gave the decks certain bonus effects if they had certain cards in there, if your decks followed certain restrictions. Like, for example, Reno Jackson, who had an effect if your deck had only one-ofs, or there was one thing where you could only put even cost cards in your deck. You can only have odd cost cards in your deck, and then you get a bonus effect, right? Something like this, right? They have never been messing with that at all, right? And they could theoretically make a deck that can only be played with 60 cards, for example. They could print a card that says you can only put this card in your deck if your deck has 60 cards, for example. And that could be interesting. But that was basically grass, right? But you know what I'm saying, right? Or they could make it so that you can play less cards as well. That'd be something to mess around with, maybe. You know, they make a deck that they say, like, if you put these cards into your deck, you get to play less than 40 cards, or you get to play more extra deck, or whatever, you know? I think that'd be something that'd be interesting. I'm not saying it'd be good. It would have to be very carefully balanced, but it is something that I think it could be fun.